light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Hu. Today I wanted to offer a few thoughts on voice, perspective, voice, and integrity. The ways that each of us sees life and experiences life in an entirely unique way. Just as no snowflake is exactly like any other, no person is exactly like any other. Even identical twins are not exactly alike. So we have the unique perspective, the unique consciousness, and then from that finding our voice, finding the ways that we speak what is in our heart, what we believe, what we value, the voice that is uniquely our own, and perhaps we even take it to the point of learning how to sing in our own voice and not to simply be an imitation of somebody around us. Or perhaps there are a great many people who seek to be the embodiment of others' expectations, and the truth, the authentic truth of who and what they are never gets shared when you do that, when one does that, because there is something totally unique and special to each and every single person that has ever lived. And for that to be as beautiful, for that to be every bit as beautiful as it can be, to reach its maximum complete beauty, there's something about creative works that beg to be shared, that if a creative work is not shared, that it somehow remains incomplete. And in a similar sort of way, if your own unique life remains unlived, it creates this sense of being incomplete, and this sense of never having said what you have to say, having only said what others said, what others' words are. And someone contacted me through the internet recently and asked if I would say something about loneliness. But in the way that he was mentioning it, he or she, I don't actually know if the gender of the person who contacted me, that it was a more profound kind of loneliness. It wasn't simply the pain of being alone and wanting someone else to be there, but it was something that went deep and right to the core of one's being. And that's where I suggested it was about perspective and awareness and self-definition and connection or lack thereof, but all things that ultimately get to a very complex and deep understanding of one's primary life purpose. That sometimes there are individuals, or perhaps it's true of all of us, and just most of us don't discover it, that there is some unique purpose we are to serve in our lives. In my case, after 28 years now, and all of the totally impossible synchronicities that have happened during that time, I have absolutely come to the conclusion that being Sister Hu is what I was born to do. It's very problematic to explain to others, however, because it's not like picking out a career or deciding I'm going to be a banker or an engineer or a computer programmer or a composer or a portrait painter or a photographer. Being Sister Hu is such a unique combination and a merging of so many things that in many ways it leaves me standing completely alone at times and wrestling with a kind of loneliness that is profound and tied to life purpose, that in a sense no one can ever understand completely what it is to be me and what it is to think my thoughts and have my feelings and speak my words and be faced with my challenges, to wrestle with my questions and figure out why one answer that works perfectly well for somebody else doesn't really work for me, and why an answer that works perfectly well for me may not be completely transferable to someone else. But that hopefully by having an ongoing dialogue and each of us wrestling with our questions and with our challenges, in the unique ways that we experience them, we can learn from each other and find a sort of inventiveness, a sort of ingenuity, where we will find the ways to use our voice and use our perspective and use our awareness to be a unique and positive presence within the world that makes the world a better place for every other individual and for humanity as a whole. But that's not possible unless one utilizes one's own perspective and the truth that is in one's heart. And there is a sense in which it sets one apart and makes one alone. When we look up at the night sky and we see constellations of stars, and there may be half a dozen stars that are involved in the constellation, science tells us that those stars in actuality are millions upon millions of miles or even light years apart from each other. They are not standing as close as people stand in a crowd or in a public space, in a shopping mall, in a school gymnasium, in any place on a volleyball court. In playing the game of volleyball, the players space themselves in precise ways at precise distances. In the case of constellations, the only reason they look like constellation is because of our perspective. In actuality, they are standing very far apart from each other, and yet they must serve a purpose, because if they don't serve, well, in terms of navigation in sailing history, for a very, very, very long time, the only way sailors could navigate across oceans was by charting their course according to constellations of stars. And so even though the stars were standing alone and very far apart from each other, together in the vastness of space, they formed a configuration that, by comparing it to other constellations and to horizons and all sorts of other things, sailors were able to determine where they were, in which direction they were headed, and how to find their way home, even or especially during the darkest nights. So there was a purpose that was served, and if that purpose wasn't served, those sailors would have never found their way home. There are all kinds of purposes that each of our lives serve without us realizing how helpful we are to others. I find that is often the case with making these television shows. I start the camera, I trust my intuition, I speak the words that come into my mind and hope that they are helpful to someone, and I never really know at the time who is going to be watching or how it's going to be helpful. Or if it will be that this show is replayed numerous times, and at some future occasion somebody sees the show that was recorded perhaps even years before and finds inspiration and insight within that show that helps them come to terms with a particular challenge or problem or question in their personal life. Returning to this question of loneliness and how to find it simultaneously painful and empowering, and a sense in which one is serving a higher purpose. And there are many ways that doing the unconventional ministry of Sisterhood has set me so apart from the rest of humanity that I find myself frequently all alone. And yet, when I receive these notes of how I have been helpful to others, and so many people telling me, please don't ever stop, and I wish to serve that purpose, and I feel a sense of duty because of the way my life and the things I've said have been helpful to others. But there's no certainty to it, because I never know at the time who might be listening, when they might be listening, how they might understand it, because there are probably 100 different ways to understand every metaphor that I share within my show. In trying to intuitively grasp and wrestle with this deeper awareness of loneliness and how it can be profound at the same time that it is this experience of isolation, that it may not be meaningless isolation, but it may be isolation that serves a purpose, just as a star within a constellation experiences isolation while unknowingly serving a navigational purpose. There is something about being reference points for others, about being an example of kindness and understanding or patience or wisdom, even when we don't realize we're demonstrating wisdom. And even when we don't know what the answer is, something about the caring way that we listen and the way that we remain a presence of love and peace in someone's life experience, in someone's day. Being the one person who smiled at the cashier at the checkout in a department store, and having noticed what just transpired, smiles at them and says, "I'm sorry you had to deal with such an unpleasant customer right before me. I will try to be much, much better than that." And to be understanding and realize that the cashier is not a robot. The cashier has emotions, and that every time one steps up to the counter, one is not starting at zero. One is starting at whatever the ending point of the previous conversation was. And if the previous person was argumentative or impatient or snobbish or any number of things, it gives the cashier, who is a human being, emotions to sort and no time, because they have to hurry because there's a line of people waiting, and no time to deal with their own emotions and to say, "Excuse me just one moment," while they take a deep breath and try to let go of all the unpleasant feelings that past conflict-ridden exchange left me with. That I've just talked with someone who was very impatient and trying to put unrealistic expectations on me, and why aren't you faster, and why can't this happen, and why is this inconveniencing me? More often, life remains this stubbornly unpredictable place where unexpected things happen, or as I say, life's pitching curveballs again. And I try to find the strength to move into it and through it graciously and gracefully, and with patience and understanding and kindness. And yes, I'm running a little bit late, but the world is never perfect, and to some extent I have to adapt to that and figure out how much I can improve things and how much it's just not something I can do anything about. Traffic on the highway involves so many other drivers and so many independent minds and so many individual people, that for anyone to say that traffic should be totally predictable and always happen on time and no accidents and yeah, right, reality check. Life doesn't unfold that way. But if we can embrace even the challenging moments with love and understanding, things may turn out to be at least okay, manageable. Not a tragedy, not a catastrophe. Hey, we got through it, and everything's basically okay. So this person puts this question to me of, say something about loneliness. And I was trying to think of the most eloquent way to describe the intuitions that came into my mind. And I'd like to read them to you, because I'm not sure if I can rephrase them quite as well as I was blessed to phrase them at that time. And of course, when you're typing it on a screen, you get lots of opportunity, or you have time to look at the words on the page and figure out whether that's, in each word, is that the right word, or should it be this different word that means almost the same thing but not quite. And in all that editing, I've been told that 90% of writing is actually rewriting, and my own experience certainly makes that seem true. In any case, as to loneliness, I suggest that what we both feel is a complex combination of emotion, perception, and reality, the simultaneous separateness and interconnection that is sometimes very painful, but at other times very reassuring, because of the ways that it reveals the fundamental purposes of our respective individual lives. There is a sort of truth within acceptance of this non-physical reality that can be profoundly empowering. But there is also a deep sadness that never really goes away, and from which one can never truly escape. It gives a depth and breadth to awareness. It gives a depth and breadth to awareness and life experience that perhaps most people will never understand. But the fact that they do not understand does not make it less real. The fact that it sometimes hurts in no way diminishes how empowering it can ultimately become, if it is honestly accepted and constructively integrated. Things that hurt which are simultaneously inescapable hold tremendous power for the transformation of oneself and for the whole of humanity as well. That is why, in spite of their pain and sadness, they must be allowed. It is so much easier to say than do, but my personal experience insists that one must listen to and learn from the most difficult experiences life has to offer, if one is to have any chance of becoming the most incredible person that human history may ever see. In closing, I'd like to offer the words of an unknown author displayed on a plaque on my desk. For those who have had to fight for it, life has a special meaning that the protected shall never know. The experience of loneliness is not just about the superficial experience. It is about reconnecting with a deeper part of ourselves, and perhaps even a deeper part of others, a deeper part of people around us who may also be suffering or who may also be struggling with loneliness. And it's not about so much saying, well, let's be lonely together, and then neither one of us will feel lonely. It's a little more complicated than that, because to me, the true escape from loneliness comes from a deep sense of connection, and that requires empathy and understanding, not just being with a material object or space, but being with each other in a way that involves love and involves perhaps to some degree understanding, but not necessarily even understanding. Even when one doesn't understand, one can still be emotionally present. One can still be there and say to the other person, your experience is different than anything I've ever known, and I can't claim to understand it, but I want you to know that I care enough about you to be present with you in the midst of it. And that if it takes a while for it to go away, we will be like two people standing in the rain who really don't know each other's life stories at all, but we're standing in the rain under an umbrella, trying to keep each other dry while we wait for the rain to stop. And no rainstorm lasts forever. They all eventually come to an end. So we don't have to view our circumstances as unchanging or to view ourselves as trapped within them to where we can't be anywhere else. But we can find a deeper meaning in being together even in circumstances that we don't understand. That for that moment, there was someone else with us who also didn't understand, and they didn't know our story and we didn't know theirs, but we knew how to hang on to the stem of an umbrella together. And we knew that it is beneficial during a rainstorm to stay dry. And there is something about being with someone, even a total stranger, under an umbrella in a rainstorm that immediately invites possibilities of becoming a two-person community. That for that time, we extended some of our energy to be a benefit to someone else without asking for any payment. It was about true generosity and true love. It wasn't about making a profit or finding an entrepreneurial opportunity that, which on that note, it always seemed very amusing to me when I lived in New York City many years ago, that on every street corner you would find street vendors selling umbrellas and bandanas and raincoats and all sorts of things, except for when it rained. As soon as the rain started to fall, they of course didn't want to be out in the rain either, and so they all went someplace, and all the streets were empty until the rain stopped falling. And here I am coming out of the school that I was attending at the time, the acting academy, and it's raining. I didn't know it was going to rain, so I didn't bring my umbrella. I've got $5 in my pocket, and I would gladly buy an umbrella if I could find one to buy. But during the rainstorms, all the umbrella salesmen disappeared. It was the sort of thing that if it had been deliberate would have been something that would be rich material for a sacred clown, that there is an irony and an absurdity of life that may make us laugh or may make us experience anguish, hopefully makes us reflect that either to plan ahead and always have an umbrella along, or to somehow remember that life does include rain. And because it includes rain, it may be a really good idea to always have an umbrella within reach until such time as the rain stops and the rainbow makes itself visible again. It would be ideal, I suppose, to say that we should travel through life always being prepared for whatever challenges life would throw at specifically us. The challenges that life has thrown at me are not the same as the challenges that have been thrown at others. And I don't want to slip into trite answers and easy sorts of witticisms, about look on the bright side or be prepared at all times. And I want to wrestle with the question enough that both the question and myself can have integrity. And wrestling with the question of what does loneliness mean? And why does it happen? And perhaps why does it happen so often? And understanding that it isn't always bad, and sometimes it shows us the deeper part of ourselves, and sometimes I don't have the strength, because of all the other difficulties I've had to deal with today, I just don't have the strength for one more lesson or one more contemplation of what's the deeper meaning of this. Sometimes I am so tired of dealing with life's struggle that if anyone were to say that to me, I would probably slap their face and just say, do you have any decency at all that you would say to a person who is clearly struggling something that was really of no help whatsoever? What would be more helpful is to put out your hand and say, can I carry that for you for just for a block or so? You look so tired, let me carry that backpack for you. Hopefully there's enough other clues, I guess, that one understands that this is a person who genuinely does want to help, who genuinely has some empathy. And I'm reminded of the recommendation that if someone asks you to walk with them 1 mile, go with them 2. That the first mile will be walking out of a sense of moral obligation, but the second mile will be walking as friends. And that even if we don't know each other, even if we never see each other again, we experience loneliness together. We experience life together. And even if we never know each other's name, our life experience is no longer something that is disconnected from every other life experience around us. But we have to redefine ourselves in ways that our lives have overlapped, and kindness and unconditional love pass between us, even if it was just in a small, considerate sort of gesture that did not require any sort of major sacrifice. Knowing one's life purpose, in those moments of loneliness, I think also often provides a kind of strength that if the silence or the loneliness or the separateness or the isolation is not meaningless, but perhaps it would be like the Pony Express riders in the Old West, that they spent quite a number of hours alone riding a horse as fast as they could to carry the news from one place to another. And that at each end of that communication, somebody's hopes and fears and peace of mind and inspiration depended upon receiving the letter that the Pony Express rider was carrying. So it was an isolation that served a purpose, and because it served a purpose, they did not have to wonder whether it was worth it, whether it was worth the sacrifice and the risk of being killed or hurt along the way. It's worth all those risks to get this letter from this person to this person, because it's those sorts of symbiotic exchanges that allow life to go on and allow people to believe in life instead of becoming so depressed that they're tempted with thoughts of suicide. Even in your lonely moments, love is what makes the difference. Thank you very much for watching. I hope some of the things I've shared in the last half hour have been helpful to you.